At Thanksgiving's dinner, my aunt clinked her glass and proclaimed, "We took a vote. You're officially cut off." Laughter followed. I smiled, pulled out an envelope, and declared, "Then you won't be needing this." The room remained silent when she saw what was inside. I, 29M, never thought a Thanksgiving dinner would become the moment everything changed. But as I sat at that familiar table, watching my aunt raise her wine glass with that smug smile I'd grown to despise, I knew this year would be different. The dining room buzzed with the usual pre-dinner chatter. Extended family filled every chair around the oversized oak table that had hosted our gatherings for 15 years. My aunt, the self-appointed family matriarch since my grandmother passed, commanded attention from her seat at the head. She'd orchestrated these dinners like military operations, deciding who sat where, what topics were acceptable, and apparently, who belonged in the family. I'd arrived late, deliberately. The past 6 months had been brutal, and I wasn't looking forward to their judgment. My startup had failed spectacularly, leaving me broke and living in a studio apartment across town. My ex-fiancée had left, taking half our mutual friends with her. The family knew all this, of course. News traveled fast in our tight-knit circle. My aunt cleared her throat and tapped her glass with a butter knife. The room fell silent. She stood, wine sloshing slightly as she steadied herself. Her husband sat beside her, nodding approvingly. My cousins exchanged knowing glances. Even my own parents looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. She announced that the family had taken a vote. They decided I was officially cut off from family gatherings until I got my life together. The laughter that followed was hesitant at first, then grew louder as others joined in. Someone muttered something about tough love. Another voice mentioned how I'd been bringing everyone down with my problems. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, processing what had just happened. 29 years old, and my own family was voting me out like some reality show contestant. The humiliation burned in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. What they didn't know was that I'd been expecting something like this. My aunt had been dropping hints for months, making snide comments about my situation during phone calls with my mother. She'd always been controlling, but since becoming the family's financial advisor after her husband's promotion to partner at his law firm, she'd grown worse. I smiled, reached into my jacket pocket, and pulled out a manila envelope. The room's attention shifted to me as I stood. I told them that since they were cutting me off, they wouldn't be needing what was inside. My aunt's confident expression wavered slightly as I slid the envelope across the table toward her. She opened it with trembling fingers. Her face went white. The document inside was a property deed, specifically for the lake house where we'd spent every summer since childhood. The same lake house where this very dinner was taking place. 6 months ago, when my startup was circling the drain, my grandmother's lawyer had contacted me. Apparently, she'd left me something in her will that had been tied up in probate for 3 years. Not money, but something far more valuable to our family, the deed to the lake house. The same property my aunt had been telling everyone she'd inherited, the same place she'd been using as leverage to control family gatherings and manipulate relatives. My grandmother, it turned out, had been far more observant than anyone realized. She'd seen my aunt's controlling nature and had specifically left the property to me, along with a letter explaining her decision. The letter was also in the envelope. My aunt's hands shook as she read my grandmother's words. The letter detailed years of watching my aunt manipulate family dynamics, control guest lists, and use the lake house as a weapon to maintain power over everyone. My grandmother had specifically chosen me because she believed I'd never use property to hurt family members. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to do exactly what my grandmother had feared. But I wasn't finished. I informed the room that effective immediately, they were all trespassing on my property. I'd already contacted the local sheriff's department, and they'd agreed to escort everyone off the premises within the hour. The annual Thanksgiving tradition they'd just voted me out of was happening on my land. The silence was deafening. My aunt's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. My uncle, the lawyer, frantically examined the documents, searching for some legal loophole that didn't exist. My cousins looked between their parents and me, confusion replacing their earlier smugness. My mother finally spoke, asking if I was serious. I told her I'd never been more serious about anything in my life. They'd made their position clear, and I was simply respecting their decision to cut me off. The next hour was chaos. My uncle tried to negotiate, suddenly remembering how much he'd always believed in family forgiveness. My aunt alternated between fury and tears, demanding to know how long I'd known about the inheritance. My cousins, who'd been particularly vocal about my failures, suddenly wanted to discuss how we could work things out. I remained calm throughout their panic. I'd spent months planning this moment, anticipating their reactions, preparing for every possible argument they might raise. The beauty of the situation was its simplicity. They'd cut me off from the family, so I was cutting them off from the property they'd assumed they controlled. The sheriff arrived exactly when I'd arranged. 3 deputies helped escort my relatives to their cars, while the lead officer verified my ownership documents. My aunt made one last desperate plea, promising to reverse the family vote, insisting it had all been a misunderstanding. I told her the vote had been perfectly clear, and I was simply honoring their decision. If I wasn't family anymore, then I couldn't be expected to share family property. As the last car pulled away, I stood alone on the wraparound porch, watching their taillights disappear down the winding dirt road. The silence was profound after hours of arguing and chaos. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace. Update 1. The aftermath was swift and predictable. My phone exploded with calls and texts for the next week. Family members who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Distant relatives emerged from nowhere, eager to mediate the situation. Everyone had an opinion about what I should do. My aunt's initial strategy was complete denial. She told anyone who'd listened that the documents were fake, that I'd somehow forged them to steal the property. Her husband, despite being a lawyer, supported this narrative until he actually researched the probate records and confirmed everything was legitimate. Then came the guilt campaign. My mother called daily, crying about how I was destroying the family. My father, typically direct, told me I was being vindictive and needed to be the bigger person. Extended relatives shared stories about all the wonderful memories created at the lake house, as if I wasn't part of those same memories. The most interesting development was watching my cousins' reactions. The older ones, who'd been particularly cruel during the dinner, tried to frame their behavior as justified concern for my well-being. They claimed they'd only supported the vote because they wanted to motivate me to improve my situation. My youngest cousin, barely 18, surprised me by reaching out privately. She admitted she'd always thought her mother was too controlling and had never agreed with the vote. She'd been too intimidated to speak up during dinner, but wanted me to know not everyone had been against me. I appreciated her honesty, but I wasn't ready to make exceptions. The family had operated as a unit when they decided to humiliate me. They could figure out their internal politics without my help. Update 2. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, my uncle requested a formal meeting. He wanted to discuss a legal resolution that would benefit everyone involved. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, curious about what approach he'd take. He arrived with a briefcase full of documents and what he clearly thought was an irresistible offer. The family would officially apologize for the Thanksgiving incident and reverse their vote. In exchange, I would transfer the lake house deed to a family trust that would ensure equal access for all relatives. He'd even drawn up papers establishing me as the primary trustee, giving me significant control over property decisions. The proposal was actually quite clever. It would restore family harmony while acknowledging my legal ownership. I'd maintain authority over the property, but couldn't unilaterally exclude family members. Everyone would contribute to maintenance costs, and major decisions would require trustee approval. I listened to his entire presentation before responding. I told him the offer demonstrated exactly why my grandmother had left the property to an individual rather than establishing a trust herself. She'd understood that family politics would inevitably corrupt any collective ownership arrangement. More importantly, I explained that the family had fundamentally misunderstood what had happened at Thanksgiving. They seemed to think I was angry about being cut off, that I was seeking revenge for being excluded. The truth was simpler and more devastating. I'd realized I didn't want to be part of a family that would vote to exclude someone during their lowest point. My uncle argued that families sometimes make mistakes, that forgiveness was essential for maintaining relationships. I agreed completely, but pointed out that forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The family wasn't apologizing for cruelty. They were apologizing for miscalculating my ability to retaliate. Update 3. Christmas approached with an interesting shift in family dynamics. Instead of the usual coordinated celebration at the lake house, relatives were forced to make alternative arrangements. Some gathered at my aunt's suburban home, while others decided to travel or celebrate with their immediate families only. The fracturing had unexpected consequences. Without the lake house as a central gathering point, family members began questioning other traditions my aunt had established. My mother mentioned that several relatives had privately expressed frustration with my aunt's controlling behavior over the years, but had never spoken up because she controlled access to the property. My cousin called to update me on the Christmas gathering. Apparently, my aunt had tried to recreate the lake house experience in her much smaller home, but the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. People kept mentioning how different everything felt, how the traditions didn't translate to a different location. More significantly, family members had started taking sides. My mother's siblings were split between supporting my aunt's authority and acknowledging that the Thanksgiving vote had been unnecessarily cruel. The younger generation was largely sympathetic to my position, while older relatives favored maintaining family unity regardless of individual grievances. I found myself surprisingly unaffected by these developments. The months of living independently had been liberating in ways I hadn't expected. Without family obligations and expectations, I'd been able to focus entirely on rebuilding my career and personal life. My failed startup had actually attracted attention from potential investors who appreciated the lessons I'd learned from the experience. I was in negotiations to join an established company as a senior developer with equity participation that could prove quite valuable. My personal life had also improved dramatically. Without the constant stress of family disapproval, I'd reconnected with friends who distanced themselves during my relationship with my ex-fiancée. I'd even started dating someone new, someone who'd never met my family and therefore had no preconceived notions about my worth based on their opinions. Update 4. Spring brought an unexpected development. My youngest cousin, the one who'd reached out privately after Thanksgiving, graduated high school early and was accepted to a college near my city. She asked if she could visit the lake house during spring break, not for a family gathering, but just to spend time there before starting college. This request forced me to confront the reality of long-term ownership. The property was substantial, requiring ongoing maintenance and generating significant tax obligations. More importantly, it held genuine sentimental value for family members who'd grown up there, including relatives who'd had no involvement in the Thanksgiving vote. I agreed to let her visit, with the understanding that it would be just the two of us. She arrived excited but nervous, clearly unsure how to interact with the family pariah. We spent the weekend hiking familiar trails, swimming in the still-cold lake, and talking about her college plans. During one of our conversations, she revealed something that reframed the entire Thanksgiving incident. Apparently, my aunt had been pressuring family members for weeks before the dinner, claiming I'd been asking relatives for money and making everyone uncomfortable. She'd convinced them that a direct confrontation would be kinder than allowing the situation to continue. This information was illuminating. My aunt hadn't simply decided to humiliate me on a whim. She'd orchestrated a campaign to isolate me based on false information. I'd never asked any family member for financial help, despite my difficult circumstances. The entire vote had been based on lies. My cousin apologized for not speaking up, explaining that she'd only learned about the false accusations after the dinner, when family members started discussing what had actually happened. By then, the damage was done, and my aunt had convinced everyone that my reaction proved I was unstable and vindictive. Final update. Summer marked 1 year since my startup failed and 8 months since Thanksgiving dinner. The anniversary prompted reflection on how dramatically my life had changed during that period. The new job had exceeded my expectations. My employer was impressed enough with my work to offer a promotion and significant equity increase. Financially, I was more stable than I'd been in years, though still far from wealthy. The difference was having genuine job security and professional respect. My relationship had also grown serious. My girlfriend had finally asked about my family situation, having noticed I never mentioned relatives or holiday plans. I explained the basics without dramatic details, and her response was refreshingly practical. She pointed out that families who would exclude someone during difficult times probably weren't worth maintaining relationships with anyway. This perspective helped me finalize my decision about the lake house. I contacted a real estate attorney to explore selling the property. The emotional attachment was strong, but practical considerations were stronger. The property taxes alone consumed a significant portion of my income, and maintaining a house I rarely used seemed wasteful. Before listing it, I made one final gesture toward family reconciliation. I sent letters to each household, explaining my intention to sell and offering them the opportunity to purchase the property at market value. I included appraisals from 3 different companies to ensure transparency. The responses were predictably varied. My aunt's family immediately accused me of spite, claiming I was selling out of vindictiveness rather than practical necessity. My uncle offered to buy the property at a significant discount, arguing that families should receive preferential pricing. My parents surprised me by expressing relief. They admitted they'd felt obligated to attend family gatherings at the lake house even when they preferred other plans. Without that obligation, they discovered they actually enjoyed quiet holidays and smaller celebrations. Most family members simply didn't respond to the letters, which I interpreted as tacit acknowledgement that they couldn't afford to purchase the property and understood my decision to sell. The sale closed in late summer. A family from the city purchased the house as a vacation retreat, paying full asking price and expressing excitement about creating new memories there. I used the proceeds to make a substantial down payment on a house near my office, finally establishing the kind of stable, independent life I'd been working toward. The irony wasn't lost on me that losing my family had ultimately led to finding myself. The humiliation of that Thanksgiving dinner had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about both my circumstances and my relationships. Sometimes the most painful experiences create opportunities for the most significant growth. I never heard from my aunt again after the sale, though I occasionally received updates through my mother. Apparently, she'd struggled to maintain her position as family matriarch without the lake house as her base of operations. Family gatherings became smaller and less frequent, eventually evolving into separate celebrations hosted by different relatives. Looking back, I realized my grandmother's decision to leave me the property hadn't been about real estate at all. She'd given me the tools to discover who I really was when stripped of family expectations and obligations. The deed was less important than the independence it represented. 6 months later, my girlfriend and I got engaged. We planned a small wedding with close friends and the few family members who'd maintained relationships with me despite the ongoing drama. My mother attended, though she still occasionally mentioned how much she missed the old family traditions. I didn't miss them at all. The new traditions we'd created were based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and control. Sometimes cutting ties, even with family, creates space for healthier relationships to develop. The lake house had served its purpose in my life, but that chapter was closed. Whatever memories were made there would remain, but future memories would be created in places and with people I'd chosen rather than inherited.